This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
All right. As promised, we told you that we were going to bring on the directors of Goliath. And I watched it last night. I watched all 3 episodes. It was awesome. Documentary on Wilt Chamberlain. Rob Ford and Christopher Dillon are kind enough to join us. There's Mr. Dillon now. Good afternoon, Mr. Dillon. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me all right?
Oh, we hear you perfectly. And by the way, you can follow him at Chris_K_Dillon K. And then let's see. We are awaiting. We're awaiting your second half here. See if Rob, pops in. Yeah. I think Martin, you can't be on, brother. You're not gonna allow Rob to get on. We got to knock Martin out. Martin's gonna have to watch on YouTube. Martin, you need to watch on YouTube. You got to drop off so Rob can get in there. But anyway, Chris, I want you to know what an awesome job you guys did. And brother, you know, maybe because I'm 56 now and I'm getting more emotional as I get older, but brother, you had me bawling at the end. Now, I don't want to give everything away, but you had me bawling at the end. I just want you to know if that was your intentions.
Yeah, well, our intention was to make ourselves bawl at the end. You know, when you make these things, you're the first audience. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, that's how it made us feel. You know, when we learned that and we realized what was actually going on with him. And obviously, we don't want to give too much away, but it has to do with one of the big themes of this piece is the way that the public perception of Wilt made him feel and how far it was from the person that he, wanted to be and that who he believed that he was, and that a lot of the people close to him, thought that he was. And when we thought about that for the ending, we're like, that has to be it. And yeah.
Again, I don't want to give away the stuff, but what you talked about, how where it ends, where it started, where he was young, and how it ended, it just that how you brought it to a bow. It was just one of those things. And then the other thing that as we get to know, and I guess a nugget I have to give out, because we're so used to talking about, Wilt Chamberlain, 20,000 women and sex and all that stuff. And he was the opposite of that as a human being, actually. Yeah, while he enjoyed a bachelor life that anybody that was a bachelor, I'm sure, would enjoy the same kind of life. But at the same time, he gave back so much. And as I'll give it away, Jackie Joyner Kersey was, one of the reasons why she became the household name that we all got to know. Well, this is one of the men that helped, find and develop her, part of his, track team that he sponsored and all of that, and how he gave back to women's sports, how he gave back to human beings, how he gave back to his family members, how he gave back to his friends. I mean, all these kind of things, it just kind of, you guys did a marvelous job of showing more the human being instead of us just looking at the athlete and the sex conga line.
That is exactly what we were trying to do. There's some of these sports documentaries, they're exercises in kind of myth making and sort of building up the mythology around an athlete. And we wanted to do the exact opposite with this. We wanted to, because Wilt's myth is so well known, especially for people who know basketball. If you don't know basketball, then you know the 20,000 women and like the celebrity who was in the movie with Arnold and all that stuff. But we wanted to take what we thought we knew about Wilt and then show you that. And there are times where the myth is true, where things that we think about Wilt are accurate, but that also doesn't mean that there aren't things about him that are contradictory, and that are complex. And so I would say in terms of the women, absolutely, he dated a lot of women and he was, a sort of self-described womanizer, but at the same time, that wasn't all he was with women and toward women. There was quite a bit more. And that was the part that, we were happy to reveal. And also in terms of the basketball, for the sports fans out there, like if you think Wilt's career and who he was and that he was this selfish, unrepentant gunner and all of these things, I think you're going to be really surprised when you see how the games actually played out compared to what you may have been told happened by the stories that get handed down over generations. Like Havlicek steals the ball. I thought I knew what happened in that game, you know, and I was wrong. And I will, your tease about the end and the beginning, I will let people know, at least in terms of the beginning, if you are a sports fan, you will get to see the triple overtime college championship game for the first time in any documentary, where Wilt Kansas goes against UNC, and it was the most famous college basketball game for at least the first 75 years of college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, again, just the things that you learn. By the way, whose idea was it to use the? I don't know what they're not cartoons, they're not figures, they're shadow, they're
shadow. They are live theatrical shadow puppets. Those are being performed by people, and that I will give a lot of credit to my partner Rob, because we were trying to solve for. You know, there's all these intimate stories that we have about him for which there literally is no footage or photographs. Stories from childhood, stories from things that happened between he and teammates, personal interactions that are, you know, in the locker room, like things that there just is no imagery for. And we had to use those stories. They were the reason to do this. But at the same time, what are we going to show? So I had brought up the idea of animation to Rob, and he said, oh, what about this? And this company, Manual Cinema, and what they did was very beautiful and you know, very unique. And also, I think it spoke to the fact that, like, we're telling a story about Wilt. A lot of this is about stories that were told about him, stories that he told, and we are now telling a story about him. And we wanted to acknowledge, like, look, this is subjective. You know, we're not claiming that we have, like, this is the definitive absolute truth. These are just more stories about Wilt for more people, including himself, which was what he really wanted. You know, in his life, he wanted a documentary where he could communicate who he thought he was, and then he passed away before it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, not to give it away, but the images, like the one where you did with in the classroom, where he's, you know, so much bigger, and then also when he was sent back to kind of a remedial class and all that, it's just what you're describing. They did a marvelous job of also sending the same message with the imaging, and I thought that was genius too, you know, at the same time. And I didn't realize he played 17 years with the Globetrotters. I knew he played with the Globetrotters. I didn't know it was 17 freaking years. And the way he, you know, back in those days, you know, again, you guys will see when you watch the documentary, how he was so ahead of his time on the business end. We just watched the Nike one, and we just realized that Mama Jordan was actually the better business person, not Michael. Actually, I'm almost, you know, I got to tell you, I'm at a point, Chris, that if Mama Jordan ran the Hornets, I think they might have won more. Okay, you know what I'm saying?
I'm a Blazer fan, so like that makes, when you're talking about the Hornets right now, I'm like smiling really big because I'm so happy.
It's not like she knew what her son was, you know, when you watch the movie.
And Wilt, I just talked about this the other day because of that movie Air, ending on the Jordans understanding their value in this, and that they have power and they deserve to be cut in. And Wilt, you know, you're giving some things away, but it's so worth watching. The fact that Wilt in the mid 1960s understood that he had the value, that he deserved to be and he was promised partial ownership of the Sixers. And you know, when that didn't happen, you know, he was like, okay, well, I know that I actually bring things to bear here that matter, and that, you know, that have power, and you're going to respect that power. And everyone, Kevin Garnett, who's an executive producer for this, says it in the piece. He's like, there is no Magic, there's no Michael, there's no me, there's none of us without Wilt, because from a business standpoint and from a popularity standpoint, he took a league that was shrinking when he joined it. By the time he ended, it was on firm financial footing, had a national television contract, and he was the highest paid player in all of athletics, not just basketball, which was by far like third of the big three at that time.
It was in the documentary that said it, and it was a great point, that by the time Michael got into the league, the league was already on great footing because of Magic and Bird. When Wilt was trying to elevate it, it was dirt poor, dude. It was nowhere to be found. I mean,
it was disappearing. Like half the teams in the league had gone away. So the trend line was that this is not a league that's going to. There had been pro leagues before that had failed. So, Wilt is, I mean, the GOAT debate is an interesting one to have. And you can talk about it from so many angles, highest peak versus greatest career versus all these things. But I think Gary Pomerantz says it in the piece. I think it's indisputable that the most important basketball player in the history of professional basketball is Wilt Chamberlain, because without him, it wouldn't exist in the form that we currently have it. Yeah. And he smashed racial barriers without just through his greatness. Like, it's so funny. We were talking about this because in the piece you learn that he was recruited by colleges in the South. This is in the mid-'50s during Jim Crow. And he made, just his sheer greatness, he made racists have to reckon between their racism and their greed. And their greed won. They're like, he's so good.
Wait till you see the documentary and what he did to Kansas, folks.
Yes.
All by his lonesome. Wait till you see the documentary and what he did to Kansas in the 60s. Okay? Yeah. All right. Black men don't do that in the 60s. Only Wilt Chamberlain did that. That alone, I don't even want to give it away, but that alone in itself was a hell of an accomplishment by Wilt Chamberlain. You know what I mean? That's the kind of impact that man had. I thought, Chris, you guys did just a marvelous job. It's one of those that I get to watch over and over again now, because I'm going to want to watch it a second, a third, a fourth time, because I'm going to want to catch little things that I might have missed, and to me, that was the beauty of it. You had so many nuggets in there, so many things that I didn't know about Wilt Chamberlain. I didn't know the impact he had, how he affected certain things. It was really, really marvelous.
3 hours is not
give me something that didn't make the documentary.
Because there's
always ends up on the floor.
Oh, for sure. I mean, honestly, we could have made a documentary that was twice as long as this, but you make these things within like the parameters you have. And so, the conquistadors, he became a coach in the ABA. When he left the NBA, he jumped over to the ABA, made a ton of money, and he's flying up to San Diego or sometimes helicopter and flying up to San Diego from LA to coach the team. He just walks in sandals, sometimes no shoes, and just shows up at game time, coaches the team, and then leaves, and then jumps from that to founding, because he's in a volleyball Hall of Fame, and because he was a solid player. I mean, his size and everything made him incredible at the net. But, he's not an all-time great volleyball player, but what he was the guy who elevated volleyball into the public consciousness because of his celebrity. He was the co-founder of a professional volleyball league that he played in, and was the the David Stern of that. So, I mean, that's just fun stuff, but there's so many personal stories. It's just, when you hear one that's similar and really great, you don't have time to tell 3 or 4 more in something that's this short, and I say it's 3 hours and I say it's this short, but this guy lived a life that is so fantastical. I mean, it's epic. If I were to say, like, okay, this guy is arguably the greatest athlete, and if you watch episode 1, you'll see what I mean about his athleticism might still not be rivaled as a young man. We know him from images of him in the 70s after he's older and been injured, but as a young guy, we have a few glimpses of it, and then the stories. If he's just that, or if he's a guy who came and shattered all these records, or if he's a guy who shattered racial barriers because people just wanted to have him, or he was a guy who changed how business worked and athletics forever, which he did. Each one of those guys is worthy of a documentary. To take all of them and then have him be a guy who's also a celebrity who dates tons of women and he's with Arnold is like, there's nobody like that,
Who owns his house now?
I don't. It was bought by a writer from The Simpsons after he passed. Oh, okay. And then they had it for a long time, and then I think they just sold it. I'm not sure who now owns his home. The Darth Vader helmet, as Gary Pomerantz calls it. That clip from Wide World of Sports with Jim McKay, where it's just about his house in the 70s, is, when I found that online, I was like, this is priceless. I mean, come on.
Yeah. And I would imagine that house never will go out of style, because the way it looks, it's just completely different. So the architecture was just absolutely awesome. And by the way, the other thing, Tua is a really hot button topic down in South Florida here and with the Dolphin Nation worldwide. And it happens a lot on this show and all that. And it's funny because like we like last year and I, we would explain to people, or in the last 2 years when he's running for his life, I said, he needs help. And so sometimes people come at me and say, oh, so what? Tua can only win if it's a perfect team. And I go, no, it's just every athlete needs help. Dan Marino was a great quarterback and never won a championship because you never gave him a defense and a running game. Just like John Elway was a choker, like Wilt Chamberlain was for many years because he didn't have the team. And then you gave him the defense and you gave him Terrell Davis and he won. And it's funny, right now, the best quarterback's in Kansas City. Okay, great. A couple of years ago when he went up against Tampa, he didn't have an offensive line and Pat Mahomes got killed and he couldn't win. And I'm glad that, 50 years ago, I think that's where it started. I think Wilt Chamberlain was the first athlete. He said, why aren't you winning? You're so dominant. You're all but no, but he's by himself and you still can't do it by yourself. And Wilt might have been the test tube baby that we in sports.
Not even a question. Right? Not even a question because it was how they grew the league. And we get in episode 2, we get into this quite a bit. The narrative that was used to sell the league was to take a team sport and boil it down to 2 individuals because that's just easier to tell in a story. And you can attribute qualities to those guys. Like Russell's the selfless team player. I love Bill Russell. I will never say anything negative about Bill Russell. I think he's a genius as a player. But the story that was told is that he's the selfless team player and Wilt is the selfish scorer. And that was the David and Goliath, where the title comes from, was born in people's minds, and it was effective. And so that became the way that all team sports now get sold through the Stars, which is why the Stars, make so much money because they are also the chief marketing tools for the league. And that's what happened to Wilt. It was interesting for us and for me to be able to show some of these iconic games for which he was called a choker and let you watch the game and see for yourself if you think he choked. Because the story was told that he did. And that distance between what I saw and the narrative that I had grown up hearing was fascinating for me and why we wanted to get into exploring this. So why can the story be wrong? How be wrong? And I would also say like Wilt is our basketball expert is a guy named Ben Taylor. He has a Thinking Basketball podcast and a YouTube channel and wrote the Thinking Basketball book. And he talks about Wilt as being the most instructive player in NBA history because there'd never been a Wilt before a Wilt. There'd never been a guy who could score against anyone and you had to double or triple him, because there was no chance that you could slow him down. He was so physically gifted and so skilled that you had to throw double teams at him. His early coaches, really didn't coach him well. They said you should shoot it all the time. And then over time, they started to realize like he has gravity and people should move off the ball. And he became more of a passer. And then suddenly he's winning championships. And then end of his career, when he's diminished, they're like, what you should do is really open up space for your teammates just with your screen setting and you're rolling. And Jerry West and Gail Goodrich are there to benefit and have the 33-game win streak. And Wilt's the MVP of the finals that year. It's not that he wasn't like, a supporting player in that. He was key, just like Russell had been key to the success of the Celtics offense with his screen setting and rolling and like dribble handoffs, all this stuff that Jokic is doing, Right. Wilt did all of that. And if Wilt had come around, just like Dan Marino, if Dan Marino had come around a little bit later in the passing era, where it's like, we understand now that if we spread out, we've got multiple receivers, it's really impossible to defend. And if we have a quarterback who can make quick decisions and is accurate, it's better than a running game. Exactly. If he comes around later, Marino's winning titles. If Wilt comes around after Wilt with the coaching that would understand how to best utilize him, I think his career plays out differently. But, there's only a handful of guys who, when they showed up in the league and in the NBA, their team was in the mix for the title from the moment they got there, basically to the moment they left. And it's Russell, it's Wilt, it's Magic, it's Bird. And it's not Michael and it's not LeBron. There's other guys who may have peaked higher, but they didn't have that impact, where it's like, and so when people diminish Wilt as a winner, I just think you're being a little bit, you're playing the results. You know,
I'm with you. I'm
Yeah.
with you. The name is Goliath. It is the documentary of Wilt Chamberlain. You can catch it on Showtime. It is phenomenal. It is 3 parts. Christopher Dillon, the director, is joining us. I'll wrap it up with this. And I'll tell you, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain remind me of Michael Jordan. And I'll say it like this. When Michael stepped into the league, he was a scoring machine. But then when Phil Jackson stepped in, he taught him how to be more of a team player and use the people around him. And he helped Scotty and others grow, and his team became better, obviously with talent, the scheme, but he also became a better team player, a passer, where John Paxson and Steve Kerr are hitting, game-winning shots, not Michael Jordan. The beauty of Bill Russell was he understood who he was from the get-go. He knew he wasn't a scoring machine, so he had to convert himself into a great player in other ways, and that's how he became a great player. Wilt didn't have that guy until he got to Philadelphia. Was it Hanneman or Hannon or
Alex Hannum? Yeah.
Until Alex actually stood up to him and explained to him, and then he started to become more of a team player. And I think that that's what happens in today's game. 20 years ago, 50 years ago, there are some guys that immediately get what they have to do and how to become like a Tim Duncan. And then there are other guys that have to kind of evolve and figure out how I have to play this game. And I think that Wilt didn't have that guidance like he probably needed early on. Bill Russell, he didn't need it. He understood himself. So did Tim Duncan. Those kind of guys kind of knew who they were already from the get-go, so they were able to play comfortably in their shoes. But again, like we were talking about how, the Tua thing or Mahomes with Wilt Chamberlain, the same thing here, overall, that a lot of the stuff, it's a cycle, man, and it's a vicious cycle.
Jackie McMullen says it, I think, really well. She says that, like, Russell never had the burden of being the guy who everyone expected to score, so that allowed him to be this other type of facilitator on offense, creating space for his teammates. And we know there'd never been a Wilt before Wilt. So, he was actually coached the opposite way. Frank McGuire was the reason for the 50-point per game season was not that Wilt just was like, bringing the ball up himself. He's a big man. They had to feed him the ball. It was designed to give Wilt 40-plus touches a game, with the idea being you should shoot it because you're the most efficient one-on-one player that's ever played. And not understanding that there's a better way to be efficient and also had the good to land with the Celtics with all those Hall of Famers, but also with Red Auerbach, and you'll, as you see in the piece, it was almost Wilt. Auerbach wanted Wilt, and in his way, who knows if we'd even know who Bill, because he wouldn't have played for St. Louis. So Russ just given up basketball. I mean, that's how, like, when we look at these narratives, once they're over, as if they had to be that way. And there's so much randomness, good and bad, that comes into everyone's story. It's really about how hard did you try, and great were your gifts. And I would make the case there has never been a player of Wilt's caliber who continued to evolve throughout his career and was willing to change. When coaches asked him to score a ton, he did. When they asked him to be a facilitator, he did. When they asked him to play defense and start the fast break, he did. Each time he did it, they won. And I don't know there's a guy like that.
No, I don't know if I've seen anybody like that. I mean, he's kind of like the Jim Brown. He's the Derrick Henry now. He's just a different kind of freak. The Shaqs, these kind of guys. And Wilt was he was a deer. He was a kangaroo. He was every athletic animal you can think of, on top of being just a big guy. He was a freak of an athlete. Like, Shaq could never move like this guy could move. No, could never run like this guy.
It's honestly much. It's more like if you took LeBron and made him 7'1". That's what young Wilt is more like. Because Jerry West says to me when I interviewed him, it's in the piece, Wilt was the fastest player in the league, not the fastest big man. For the 7'1", 300-pound guy to be the fastest guy in the league and a world-class high jumper, is I mean, honestly, if you came out now, 19-year-old Wilt Chamberlain came out now, the world would stop. It would just be like, what do we do with this guy? Like, we never seen a guy like this. For him to be one of the first, and that we have such little footage, but the footage we did find, I think really shows you like how high he could sky and how fast he was on the court, and the stories of his strength, including from Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Billy Cunningham story. And then there's one about where he lifted the back of a car. So somebody could change a tire.
Yeah, change a tire. Yeah, that was great. Chris, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for creating this, because obviously this is a story that needed to be told. And that's the other thing that you get from a lot of the people that are part of this series and talking about it. They wanted to also get it off their chest because they were also there, fighting for Wilt. So it was a great story. And thank you for educating me as a sports fan on things I didn't know about Wilt. So I really appreciate it. And again, Showtime, go check it out. Goliath. It's a 3-part series. It'll go by like this. Okay.
And it's
like
on Paramount Plus right now. So if anybody has Paramount Plus, you can watch the whole thing right now.
Right. YouTube also. You can find it on YouTube probably. So go check it out and enjoy it. Chris, thank you. I really appreciate it immensely. Thank you, sir. There you go. Christopher Dillon. Folks, follow him on Twitter at Chris_K_Dillon. Great job there. And just a magnificent documentary.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.